So funny story, I didn't actually hit the start button, so we're going to do the introduction again so that it's actually recorded for future generations. Hi, I'm Andy Hirsch with the Juneau Public Libraries.
And I'm Felicity Tony, also with Juneau Public Libraries.
And we're going to be talking about Senior Story Hour today. But before we delve into that, I actually want to digress for just a second and talk about self-driving cars. So self-driving cars, as you are all probably aware, are a thing that might happen, and people have been assiduously studying and working to make happen. And one of the things that's very interesting about self-driving cars is that we, as humans, can program the cars in advance to react to certain situations. And so so if a car is going to crash, do you make it veer left or veer right? That is something that you can program in advance. So there were a bunch of researchers at MIT so hold on. Yes, okay. Hold on one second. We had a question about sound, so I had paused. Can people other than Lori hear me? Okay, so it looks like we have a couple people who can hear and a couple people who can't. Julie, do you think you could work with Lori and Kitty to get their sound up?
Yeah, definitely. And for folks, they need to use Internet Explorer. That would probably be, if they use that browser, that's the best thing they can do.
Whoa. Okay.
Good
Folks,
news
is good news. You can use Internet Explorer, which Julie has typed to everyone.
And the other good news is that this is going to be recorded and we can share it with you later.
Julie will.
Yes. So if it ends up not working at all, there's another option, which we should probably type.
Yes. Okay, that was a fun discussion. I'm so good with my words. Okay, so MIT, you can program self-driving cars in advance. So these researchers at MIT basically came up with a study that they call the moral machine. So how are we as humans going to use our morals to program the cars? And they recorded over 40 million decisions made from 233 different countries and territories about who you would save in the event of a car accident with a self-driving car. And there's a couple of things that are really universal. People over pets is pretty universal across cultures, and more humans over less humans is pretty universal across cultures. After that, though, there are actually very few constants. So one of the things that they found is that countries that descend from this European tradition, including a lot of cultures within the United States, have a very strong preference for saving young over elderly. And that is not a preference found universally. So many other cultures actually have an equal preference for saving children versus elders. And so the whole reason I bring this up, it's a really long-winded way to say, know your institutional biases. We all work at I work at a public library. We all work at libraries, public, maybe some academic in there. And these are developed through this like Western European tradition, which really values children over elders. And that might not be reflected in your broader community, especially if your community doesn't come from this Western European tradition. So that is kind of the introduction of self-driving cars. By the way, this is what the moral machine looks like, and you have to make a decision about what you are going to do. There's also some other reasons why we think senior storytime is really important. This is the Juneau Public Library's mission. We are an open door to exploration and lifelong learning, providing free access to shared resources and programs that entertain, enlighten, and educate. And we think that lifelong learning component is very important. We never stop learning as people. We never stop growing and changing. And part of the mission of the library is to support people at all phases of their life to do that. If you want some more numbers about why we do this, you can take a look at the Alaska Department of Labor statistics. So one of the things that I found very interesting is that if you look at households with people over the age of 65 in between 2010 and 2017, which is kind of the most recent data I have on this, that number has grown 44%. And so now almost a quarter of all households in Alaska have somebody living in them who is at least 65. Also, if you look at demographic troughs and demographic waves, we kind of have three big demographic groups in Alaska. So this is from the 2017 data. So if you look at birth to 15 or so, we have a big wave there. We also have a big wave from 25 to 40, and we have another big wave from 55 to 60. And according to Alaska Economic Trends, those two younger groups, adults with their children, are very vulnerable to shifts in economics, fertility, migration rates, and are very reactionary. So they're more likely to pick up and move to a different location, either within Alaska or outside of Alaska, if the economy goes bad, or if the economy goes good. If the economy goes well, we're more likely to have people move in. But older people are less affected by these patterns and these migration rates. And so this strong group of aging baby boomers, the people ages 55 to 60-ish, are more likely to stick around. And the Alaska Economic Trends thinks that our population age 55 or older will increase by 60% in about the next 20 years. One more sort of numbers related reason is life expectancy at birth is going up. So we are living longer. And so for a male in Alaska in the 1970s, average life expectancy was 66. By the time you're born in 2010, it's almost 76. So we are living longer as humans, which gives us more time to do lifelong learning and more opportunities for the library to partner with that. So we're going to be having, in Alaska, we're going to be in our communities, we're going to be having greater numbers of older adults who will be living longer than they have been in the past. And it's really incumbent upon libraries to know that this is coming and adapt and work for making inclusive programming and inclusive collections so that we can meet the needs of our community. So we do that in a couple of different ways. We do some programming at the library, like chair yoga that we have every month. We have our pop-up library. It's our mobile library, but we don't have a bookmobile. We have a car and some suitcases, and we trundle it around to a bunch of senior locations throughout town, and allow people to check out from us directly and get help with digital things. And then we also do a very awesome senior story time, and Felicity is going to be talking about that in more detail.
All right, so thanks Andy for that, and hello everyone. My name is Felicity, like Andy said, and I'm going to talk a lot about Senior Story Hour. If you have questions as we move along, feel free to type them out. I'll answer them when I can. But let's begin by defining Senior Story Hour. So a Senior Story Hour, simply put, is 1 hour of engagement with seniors and older adults. And that engagement can be done in different ways. We like to read books, make crafts, eat snacks, have conversations, play games, listen to music, dance, and just really have a good time. You can see on the photos here, on the left-hand side, we actually made a poster, and we do this with every new season. We make a new poster to put up at our downtown location for folks to see when they come in. And so this was our winter-themed poster, Curl Up with a Good Book. And they all work together to figure out what's going to go where on the poster, and they have a whole lot of fun with it, and they really feel connected to the community, knowing that this is going to be displayed in the library. And then on the right-hand side, some folks from one of the places I bring Senior Story Hour were able to meet me at the Mendenhall Valley Public Library, it's our newest library facility here. And we did a tour. Some of them had been there before, others had not. And so that was really, really fun. They got to see all of the people who were there and all of the kids, and they had a really great time. So it's more than just books. We do a lot of things to engage them and to just make them more part of the community. And so next we'll talk a bit about how Senior Story Hour began. Senior Story Hour came about through a conversation that Andy and I had shortly after I was hired. We were trying to decide the direction that the outreach team would take, and Andy had suggested we focus on seniors for all of the reasons that she just said. And I thought that was a really great idea. And so we knew a couple of things that we wanted to do right off the bat. We knew that we wanted to have in-house library programming, like chair yoga, and we knew that we wanted to do pop-up libraries. But I wanted to do something a little bit more because I knew that not everyone had the ability to make it to the library. And so to bring library programming to seniors, I did a bit of research, and being really new to the library community, I had a lot to learn. And so I found quite a few things, and what I really liked the most was the idea of a Senior Story Hour. And it's not my original idea. I took bits and pieces from other types of story programming, and I'll share a couple with you that I really liked. So these are 2 programs that I really, really like, and that you can also look up yourselves and see if that might work better, or if you could use elements from either of these in addition to what you take away from here today. Tales and Travel is really great. I like this one a whole lot because it introduces participants to new things. And folks who have early and mid-stage dementia, or who have early onset Alzheimer's, people tend to focus on reminiscing with those people. And that's great. That's something that they can do really well. But I like the idea that you can still introduce new things to this population and they can still enjoy it. And I think that's the big takeaway from the Tales and Travel program. And the link there, which I can share this with you later, it actually offers tools for you to start your own kind of Tales and Travel. And then the next one, Remember When Story Times. This one does focus a bit more on reminiscing and getting folks to remember things from their past. And they do that by using props and books and even scented items to help trigger these memories. And they usually will have a theme that they use for this. And that's kind of an easier thing to follow. So they'll talk about holidays, fashion, pets, all kinds of different things, make a theme of it, and bring props that are relevant to that theme. And then Reminisce magazine is something that the Remember When Storytimes use as well, and that's something that we got at our library probably shortly after we started doing Senior Story Hour, just because it seemed like a really great way to engage with these folks, and it is. And a lot of the senior facilities around here already have those magazines, and so it's something that is easily found and you can utilize pretty well. And so I liked these 2 Senior Story Hours, or these 2 story times, and decided to use them in addition to the things I learned on how to engage with Alzheimer's folks, or folks with early onset Alzheimer's and dementia. I took those things and elements from these story times to create the Senior Story Hour that I will share with you today. So, sorry, Andy is answering a question someone asked. Which magazine did I mention? And that's the Reminisce magazine. And they have a website. If you just Google it, you can find more information on it. And maybe even get a couple of free subscriptions to see if that's something that would fit your community. I think that's what we did. So moving forward, we're gonna take a moment to define dementia, since we're going to be talking about a population that has dementia and Alzheimer's. It's easy to confuse both dementia and Alzheimer's. The thing to remember is that dementia is kind of an umbrella term. So you've got different types of dementia, and Alzheimer's just happens to be the one that people know the most about because it is the most common type, and between 60 and 80% of cases of dementia are caused by Alzheimer's. And then dementia is the loss of cognitive functioning and reasoning and behavioral abilities to such an extent that it interferes with a person's daily life and activities. So various things can cause dementia, and one of those is Alzheimer's. And Alzheimer's is it's the most common type of dementia, and it's characterized by brain cell death. And so it's a little bit, it's quite different than just having dementia. It's an irreversible progressive brain disorder that slowly destroys memory and thinking skills. It's pretty invasive. And then this chart here on the right shows you Alaska specifically. From 2018 to 2025, they expect an increase of 46.7%. And that's a pretty big number. And so before we try to make programs for our senior populations, we need to know what kinds of things that our seniors are going to be dealing with. And we need to help them along the way and make sure that our programming is something that's accessible to them and something that will engage them as well. And so I kept these two definitions in mind when creating Senior Story Hour, and also whenever I created the goal for Senior Story Hour. And that goal is not to teach, but to engage and interact with participants in a way that interests them and helps to recall memories. And so we engage with participants, like I said, through books, through crafts, through dancing and music. And it's important to do that because research suggests that the elderly experience higher rates of social isolation than younger folks, and that social isolation can occur for many reasons, including mobility challenges, poor health, and the death of loved ones. And we engage with senior populations. Whenever we do this, we're reducing feelings of loneliness and isolation. And that's important because loneliness can increase the risk of dementia by 64%. And so to keep these folks social and engaged and creating these sort of happy memories and moments for them, we are hopefully decreasing their risk of dementia. And whenever we're engaging with them and interacting with this population, we want to make sure that what we're doing is actually interesting to them. And so we can talk about things that they know and things that they don't know. Some things that they know would be fairy tales or folk tales, holiday or cultural traditions. You could talk about current and older movie stars and musicians. So anything you think that they might be familiar with, you can try to have a conversation with them about that. And then even for things that they don't know. So for adults and seniors who are not experiencing early onset Alzheimer's or dementia, learning and discussing new things or ideas is a healthy activity that may help prevent or delay dementia. And then for those who already have early onset dementia or Alzheimer's, discussing new things could be challenging because their short-term memory is affected by the disease. However, they're still interested in talking about new things. They have the ability to do that. And from my own experience, whenever I talk about certain things, like every year we talk about Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement, they're very interested in that. This was during the time that they were alive, and they may have memories, and they may still have certain opinions about current political things going on now that they're very willing to share with you. So we'll talk about those things, but I'll also talk about some of the unsung heroes of that time. And they might be familiar with the Civil Rights Movement, but not all of the people and all of the other things that were happening. So I can introduce to them some new things based on their prior knowledge, and they have a really good time talking about these things. Whether or not they remember it doesn't really matter, because this is for the moment, and we want to make sure that they're engaged and they're interested. And so that's always been a really, really successful senior story hour. And there's lots of books about that, and there's all kinds of things you can do with it. And then lastly, recalling memories, I touched on a little bit, but this gives participants the opportunity to share stuff. And so short-term memory impairment is one of the earlier symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. And I've got a nice quote here from the Alzheimer's Society that says, as the person's dementia progresses, their memory will get worse. In the early stages, the person's long-term memory is often less affected. This is probably because older memories, which are thought about more often, become more firmly established and are more likely to be recalled than newer memories. So if engaging with them on current issues is not really working, you can try to engage with them on things from their past, and that might help start a conversation. Bringing in props is really useful, especially things that are scented, to get them engaged and might help to trigger a memory. And then we bring Senior Story Hour to currently 2 different facilities here in Juneau. One of those places is the Bridge Adult Day program. And this is the place that I started going to first. I began going there in December of 2016. I would go for 1 hour once a week. Usually I see about 8 to 10 participants in addition to staff that's there. And Bridge is an adult and senior daycare facility that's open to seniors and older adults who cannot be left home alone for various reasons. And so you can kind of think of the Bridge Adult Day program as a place to bring folks who might get lonely during the day, might need some help because of mobility challenges, or they just want to be there because they do have Alzheimer's developing, and that's a safe place for them to stay. At Bridge, we often talk about current events, upcoming holidays, and I can sometimes bring a guest. So in this photo here, I brought my husband, who is a member of the VFW and the American Legion, and they loved it. He brought props, we passed him around, they asked questions. He was a really big hit, and they invited him back for coffee. So that was something that was easy for me to do for Veterans Day. I brought books, and he brought the props, and he himself was kind of the special guest and like the big prop as well. He had badges on his vest that he could take off and pass around to people, and so it was really hands-on and just a whole lot of fun. And then the other place we visit is Wildflower Court. And this is it's quite different from Bridge. It's a long-term care facility that accommodates up to 61 residents. That provides nursing and rehabilitation services. So some of the folks who are here, they'll stay for an extended period of time and then they'll leave. So I don't always see the same people. They might get out of the long-term care facility and move back home to somewhere else that's in Southeast Alaska. So not all of these folks are local to Juneau. And the way that I get the folks to visit me for Senior Story Hour is that the staff chooses folks who they think are going to be interested. They bring them in, and we have an hour where we read books, we make crafts, we chit-chat, we get to know each other. It can be really fun, but it's also really, really challenging. So a lot of these people need a bit more help than the folks over at Bridge. And so I have to figure out ways to engage with them if they have really severe arthritis, or if they can't hear, or if they can't see, or they can't see very well. So it's been quite a learning process for me, but we still managed to have fun. So you can see in the first picture here in the middle, we made a little raven, and I actually got this from Youth Services. This is something that they did. And I thought this would be pretty easy. I can pre-cut the things out and they can put it together, and they had a blast with it. The other thing that we did was make Valentine's Day cards, and that was really fun. You can see in this picture here, there's one that's in the middle of being glued down, and once he was finished, I asked him who he was going to give it to, and he turned to his right and gave it to the woman beside him. And it was just the cutest thing. So they do have a lot of fun, but there are a lot of obstacles that I have to overcome in regards to creating these crafts for them. And It can be quite challenging, but it's definitely worth it. And I'm still doing a lot of research to figure out how to best accommodate all of their needs while not making it too boring. You want it to still be challenging. So, okay, so just moving on a little bit, we've got some statistics for you. I don't know how accurate these are. So the cost is accurate. The visits and the interactions may be less accurate, but I spent for 2018 $250 on different craft materials and snacks. I used everything, all of the books and other things came from the library, but as far as the snacks go and the crafting things, I spent $250. And the time that I spent working on Senior Story Hour, and this is kind of a rough estimate, but anywhere between 2 and 5 hours a week, which could be 30 minutes to 1 hour a day. And it just sort of depends on what's coming up. And then now that I've been doing this for over a year, 2 years now, I've gotten quite a bit better. I have a whole spreadsheet with all of the upcoming holidays and things in the past that have worked and things that haven't worked. And so I do spend some time on Pinterest looking for new crafts and other ideas, but I have like a year's worth of really successful things I can go back to. And so once you've been doing this for a while, you save on time. So you might not be spending 2 to 5 hours a week. It might be more like 2 or 3 hours a week. And if you have access to volunteers, volunteers can be helpful preparing crafts or books or even buying the supplies that you might need. So this next part here is the activity outline, and we have a Word document that this was originally on, which we can share with you at the end. But this is basically what I look at every week whenever I'm deciding on what I'm going to do for Senior Story Hour. So I typically, for the activity, I will choose a theme because that seems to be the easiest way to do it. So some themes might be Veterans Day or Martin Luther King Day, or it might talk about inventions, which I'm going to be doing later today. I'll be talking about inventions, and hopefully that'll be pretty successful. I haven't done it at Wildflower Court yet. This will be my first run through, but it was really great at Bridge, so I'm hoping with some accommodations it'll work over at Wildflower as well. So the first part, the activity 1, is to open discussion with a discussion prompt. And so usually I could use something from Reader's Digest. They have this really great, written down, but they have some really great discussion prompts in Reader's Digest. Even in Reminisce magazine, you can find something that might be relevant to an upcoming holiday or an article that you could read and discuss, and that could be your opening discussion prompt there. But the point of activity 1 is to trigger memories, and you want to try to encourage them to think back on their youth and to share some kind of memory with you. And then activity, so that's maybe about a 5-minute activity there to get them interested and ready to move forward. And activity 2 is the listening and brainstorming activity. So on this part is where I'll read books, articles, I could read a poem, I could read something out of a magazine, but we'll read something, we'll take some time to talk about it. And if it's a book, I tend to read the picture books or some of the nonfiction juvenile books that have large print and usually have pictures in it. And so that's something that they can see pretty easily from a distance, and something that is pretty simple. The language is fairly simple. The concept could be higher concept, but easy language. And we'll read it and we'll talk about it. And then sometimes I even pass around the books for them to take a look at individually. Picture books work really, really great, and they really like the illustrations. What I'm having trouble with is getting them interested in the poetry books that I bring, because it's a bit abstract. Not everyone likes poetry, but I found that abstract things are a little harder for folks with early onset dementia and Alzheimer's to really understand and to even care about. So just kind of learning which books work and which ones don't is going to take some practice, but I have had great success with picture books. And then activity 2 probably takes about 20 to 30 minutes. It just really depends on the crowd and who you have in front of you and with you, and what they're interested in. Activity 3 is our hands-on activity, and you can do all kinds of things with this, and I've included a few options that I found when doing research. So you could show an item or a picture of an item. So this is something that you want them to be able to touch or to look at closely, and hopefully that could trigger some memories. So you could use a book that's got like a picture from a fairy tale in it. You could use an old movie and pass that around, something that they can really put their hands on and kind of examine. And then option 2, put an item in a sock, a bag, or a jar and pass it around. Something that I have done in the past with this is for Halloween, I'll get those candy corns and I'll put some in a jar and I'll pass it around and I'll let them hold the jar and look at the jar and try to guess how many candy corn are in the jar. And we do this for Valentine's Day with the candy hearts, and I think I've done it for Mardi Gras. I put beads, little individual beads in there, and we try to guess how many is in the jar or the bag. Another thing that I've done, if you put something in a sock or a bag that they can't see, you can ask them to put their hand in there to try to guess what it is. And I want to say I've done that with Mardi Gras beads as well. And that's been pretty successful because you're getting them to think about it and to try something new. And not everyone's willing, but it's definitely fun. And then my last one, my favorite one, is a scented item. So I once brought in vanilla. I forget what the theme was, but I brought in a cup of vanilla, and everyone was able to sniff it and take a guess at what they thought it was. And someone thought alcohol, someone thought soy sauce. I think most people got vanilla from it. And so then we talked about the uses of vanilla. When would you use it? Does it remind you of cookies or of a cake or a special recipe that maybe your mom used to make? Things like that. And so that's always really fun. I would not suggest bringing perfume. I made that mistake once, and this one poor gentleman was sneezing by the end of our hour together. So you could bring a candle, but not light that candle, and just have them smell the candle if it puts off a pretty good scent without being lit. So kind of be aware of allergies and other things like that for the scented stuff, but it's really fun. And then activity 4 could be a craft or a game. For a while, I was just doing crafts and realized we could play games. And so something that we often do when I can't find a suitable craft is we play bingo. There is a website, I don't have it written down, but there's a website where you can create your own bingo game. And the kind of bingo that I play is pretty educational. So we will play bingo for Martin Luther King Day, and I'll put different words for our bingo card. So one word would be Martin Luther King, and then another word would be civil rights. And so they hear the word, they have to visually find the word and then place a marker on the board. And so it's using a lot of different senses to make sure that they can do all of the parts of the game. Plus they win sugar-free candy at the end, and so that's been really successful and they love it. We usually have time to play 2 or 3 rounds within 15 minutes because they're very serious about their bingo. And then I haven't really tried any other games. I know that Uno can be successful. That just takes a little bit more time. And then as far as the crafts go, it's just really important to know your audience, their interests, and their limitations. I used to spend a lot of time preparing crafts, and I've gotten quite a bit better at it. What I've learned is that they like to make those paper lanterns, and I think I might have a picture on one of my examples, but you take a piece of paper and you fold it to make a cylinder, and you can staple it or tape it together, and then you can glue things on it, or you can put stickers on it, and then you can punch holes in the top and hang it from somewhere, and you have a nice hanging paper lantern. You could even attach ribbon to the bottom. If it's 4th of July, you can have 4th of July colors. If it's Memorial Day, you could put red for the red poppies on there. Just different things with that, and they don't seem to get tired of it. So it's kind of my go-to. If we don't have bingo, we can do this instead. But it's just knowing your audience, their interests, and their capabilities. Some folks can't use the scissors or glue, and so having stickers readily available for them to stick onto something is a great idea. So whenever I go to Bridge, I don't have to do so many things in advance because they have a bit more mobility with their hands. But at Wildflower Court, I might want to cut some things out ahead of time so that all they have to do is glue it together. So that's just one way to accommodate for folks who have arthritis or limited vision. I went through that a bit quickly, but does anyone have any questions about this before I move forward? I'm not seeing a response, so I think I'll just move forward. This is an example of an activity outline that I did at Bridge about apples. We usually do this in the fall, and it's been one of the more favorited themes that we've done. So the opening, which I might not have had this on the last one, but we always do an opening where we say something that we're happy about. I usually go there after lunch, and so they'll say they were happy and satisfied with what they had for lunch. And so we'll talk about that a bit, and then I'll move the discussion over to activity 1 with a discussion prompt. And so for apples, we talked about Johnny Appleseed. I asked the question, if anyone's heard of him, what did he do, who was he? I'll have Johnny Appleseed books to show them, and we'll kind of focus on the apple portion of Johnny Appleseed. And then we'll talk about apples and how they're associated with fall and how they are harvested in the fall season. So we talk about apple picking, bobbing for apples, making apple cider, apple pie. And then again, we'll talk about harvesting for us, what that means to harvest in Alaska. So we'll talk about picking berries, devil's club, spruce tips, different things like that. And so that's kind of a variety of talking points there, and we'll spend however much time on any one of these topics just to make sure that they're engaged before we move on to the listening activity. And so here I just have listed a few different books that I've read, and this changes every time. I like to revisit some books, and then I like to try to get new books as we get new books into the library. And so for Bridge, we had a nonfiction Apple book that we were able to look at, and that was something that I don't think I wanted to bring to the other place. It wouldn't have quite as much interest there as it did at Bridge. And then for activity 3, the hands-on activity, I used that book to show them the different types of apples, and I read recipes with these different types of apples, and then we discussed our favorite apples. And so that was not quite as hands-on as it could have been, but they were really engaged and interested and wanted to share stuff of their past with apples, whether it was cooking with mom, or it was apple picking, or bobbing for apples. So we had a lot to talk about there. And then for our craft or our game, sometimes I'll do some edible crafts, and so we did an apple tasting. So the facility, Bridge, provided applesauce and apple cider, and then I had 3 or 4 different types of apples that we cut up, and everyone had one of each one, and we had an apple tasting. So we would try one and see what they liked, and I found out that they absolutely hate the red apples, which I agree, they're not very good. And then my favorite, the green apples, was a little too tart for some of them. And so it was really funny to watch them eat it, and like their faces got all scrunched up, and we had a really good time with it. And then for closing, I'll ask them how they liked the activity, and I'll thank them for spending time with me. I think it's really important to thank them for giving me their time, and they always ask me to come back, and I always tell them I am coming back, don't worry, you can't get rid of me. But something that came from this specific activity is that the activities director over at the Bridge Adult Day program took some of these seeds from the apples and planted them, and they actually have one of them sprouted and it's still growing, but we have no idea which kind of apple it's going to be or apple tree it's going to be. So that's been really exciting. They show it to me almost every time I go there, and so yeah, a lot of good came from this other than just the time that I was there. And then I did the same theme at Wildflower Court, but I changed a few things. So the opening is pretty much the same. We talked about Johnny Appleseed. We talked about different types of apples and harvesting and the fall time. I read similar books, maybe not quite the same, but some of the same ones. But the way that I differentiate Bridge and
Oh, on
Wildflower
this one,
is through the hands-on activity and the crafts. That's normally where there's the big differentiation there. So what we did as our hands-on activity was smell apple cider, and guess what it was? And after they smelled it, we could drink it, so everyone drank it, and we talked about it. And so that was really fun. It was something that, it was a little treat for them, something a little sweet. And then instead of doing an apple tasting, some of the folks there have dentures, and so chewing on apple is not really ideal. And so we just did something more hands-on. We did an apple tree painting, and that's something I found from Pinterest. And I'll move forward to show you what that looks like. I had an example that I printed out, and I had an example that I had made myself. And I put these, spread them around so everyone had something to look at as an example. And my idea was that we would use corks to create the green part of the tree. The brown part was already, was construction paper, so I put that on there as their base, and they would just add the green. What I learned is that corks, these were a little small, and that somebody who has really bad arthritis is going to really struggle with holding a cork and dipping it in the paint and bringing it back and going back and forth. And just the way that you have to hold the cork is a little challenging. And so a staff member at Wildflower Court showed me, and you can see it on the left-hand picture, kind of near the top. You can take a bundle of Q-tips, you can dip those in the paint, and then you can put that on your paper. And that worked a whole lot better for some of our folks with pretty serious arthritis, especially Alzheimer's, pretty serious arthritis. And then the other option that we had was to put apples on there. The example that I brought printed out had used red buttons, but we also had red paint, and we used Q-tips to add the red apples that way. So it gave them a few options, so they didn't have to do the same thing, and they really liked having different variations of the apple tree. And then when we were done, we put them aside to dry, and then the activities director there put them up on display where people could look at them later on. And so that was one of our really fun ones, and talking about apples, I think, is always really successful, especially in the fall time. And I think actually that's it. I've got a slide here with some sources. Went a little quickly, but does anyone have questions or any comments?
Hi, this is Julie. So I noticed that on some of your slides that you talk about, you ask them, how they thought about the program. Is that the only evaluation that you're doing, or is there some other form of evaluation?
That, I guess, is maybe the only type of evaluation that I get from the participants. I know that I'll talk to the staff members, the activity directors, to see how things are going, if people are still interested in it, and they'll give me feedback on if they think, well, this worked or this didn't work, or why don't we try this. I do have more participation from staff at Bridge than at Wildflower Court, and so we'll get together and talk about future plans more often than we will at Wildflower. So as far as getting evaluations back, I don't get too much, but the participants will always tell me whether or not they liked something. And I see Rebecca asked a question, what have been your biggest challenges? I think right now one of my biggest challenges is having staff help me out whenever I have a fairly large crowd of folks and I don't know them very well. So at Wildflower Court, like I said, folks might stay there for a little while and leave, and they'll have new people who take their place. And if I'm not familiar with them, or they can't hear, or they can't see very well, I have a hard time making a connection with them. And because I don't know them very well, I don't know what kind of craft or activity would work well for them. And so I'm really having some challenges engaging with some of the folks who participate in Senior Story Hour at Wildflower Court. But I'm hoping after having a conversation with the activities director and staff that they can hopefully have someone in the room with me to address any of the needs that I'm just not really seeing or that I don't know how to address or how to handle. Does that answer your question? Great. Any other thoughts or questions?
Yeah, this is Julie. So when you first started your program, did you personally just go to each of these facilities and kind of broach your idea with them? I mean, did you present them with like an outline of an actual program, or how did you actually get your foot in the door?
Great question. So I started going to Bridge first, and what I did is I created the activity outline. I did the research, created the outline, and thought about what I wanted to do. And then I thought, where should I do this? And I had known about the Bridge Adult Day program whenever I was an AmeriCorps member serving at United Way. I got to know the community pretty well. I heard about this program, and it seemed to be a pretty good, pretty well kept secret. And so I reached out to the activity director there and I asked her some questions and I told her about this program I created and that I would like to implement it there if they were interested. And they were definitely interested, so I went over and that's pretty much how it started. I told them what I had, asked if they were interested, and we just went from there. And we've changed our dates around a little bit. They've been really flexible with us with some of the stuff on our end. But for the most part, they're very happy to have us there. Sometimes they want us to stay a little bit longer, but that's been really great. And then at Wildflower, we had actually offered a pop-up library originally. And whenever that wasn't really meeting the needs of the folks there, we were getting a lot of staff who were interested in the pop-up library, and that wasn't why we were there. They can go to the library. They don't have the same barriers. So Andy and I went to see the activities director and presented him with a few of my activity outlines, including books and props that we would normally have, and told them about what we do at Bridge and how we could do the same thing here if they were interested. And they were, and we gave it a try. And some of the crafts, or like the more like the edible crafts that I do, I would send him in advance and ask, is this okay? And he's the one who said, well, you know, some folks have dentures, and so chewing on these types of things wouldn't work, but we could try this instead. And so for every month, I send them the activity outline and what we're doing, and they give me feedback on what they think would or wouldn't work. But that's pretty much all it took, was going there with all of the information and presenting it to them. And no one seems to have been really hesitant with us either. They're like, yeah, come on, it's great. And so we haven't really thought about bringing it anywhere else. We sort of thought about bringing something like this to one of our public libraries, to one of our branches, but we realized that the population that would really need this kind of programming most likely would not be able to make it to the library on time every week or every other week for this program. So as of now, I think we're pretty satisfied with where we are. And if we were to try to go anywhere else, we would do the same thing. We would have some examples, go and talk to them and see if they were interested. Oh, thank you, Kitty. Yeah, it's been really great, and working with staff I think is essential in trying to get a program like this really well received in the facilities that you go to. And like I said, one of my challenges is having staff support at Wildflower Court, but I think they recently had sort of a staffing change, and so I'm hoping we can get back to where we were and work a little more closely to help the residents. I don't think that staff turnover is an issue. I say that, but I know at Bridge they had a few folks who were there who left, but they transitioned so well into the Bridge program, the staff members, that it doesn't ever seem like there's a problem. Like the activities director, who had been there since I started going there, recently moved. Someone else took her place, but it was it hasn't really made an impact at all. It's like she's been there the whole time because she has such a strong relationship with the participants who go to Bridge every day. At Wildflower, I think the staff changes they had, so I think someone was on maternity leave is actually the thing that happened. I'm not quite sure because I don't have a great relationship with them. But it could be at other facilities that could be an issue. And I think it's important that if the staff members, if there seems to be a lot of turnover for staff, to at least have a really good relationship with the activities director, the person who hopefully will be there for the long run.
And I'm just going to jump in here real fast. The other thing that is really good about these activity outlines, Felicity is very well organized and generally has them done at least a month in advance, if not more. And so what that has allowed us to do as a library is to compensate for illness and to compensate for vacations. And so because everything is really well outlined, we say like, okay, I'm gonna go get these 5 books. I make sure to get the scented item, and anybody on our team can do the activity and lead the activity. Most of the time it's Felicity, but something that we try to be really cognizant of is if we're feeling even a little bit under the weather, we don't send a person to go work with elders. Like you're like, oh, my throat's a little itchy today, but I feel great, but my throat's like a little sore, and then I'm like, no, you can't go. And so having everything prepared in advance has made it really easy to just transition between staff members, and that has been really, really helpful because we want to always think about the population we're serving, and we don't want to serve them with I don't know, laryngitis or anything. So, all right, I'll just jump into
Andy,
yeah.
So I want to, you started this webinar, I thought very pointedly with the bias
Yes.
towards the aging. And I'm wondering, did you include that because you're experiencing it within your institution, or are you experiencing it on a broader, where you think other libraries should be in this arena, but they're not because they're so focused on children?
So I'm going to say for the first, I think it's great that we're focused on children, and adults. But there's a lot of institutional biases. So when you think about what sort of books are being published, books with large pictures and large font work really great for folks with dementia and early onset Alzheimer's. But there's, I think, one publisher who has like 12 books out. Where as opposed to like the thousands of picture books that are aimed at children and children's issues. And so it's a broader social issue, I think. And I think it's really important for us who are in the broader social culture to be aware of kind of the insipid words, sorry, to be aware of the broader biases that exist so that we can make active decisions. We've also, as an institution, as the Juneau Public Libraries, we've had a youth services for 30 years. Like they have a youth services department, they have a team, there's a youth services section. I became the senior services librarian last year, 2 years ago. And like I now have a small team, but I had to go and be like, hey, here's a bunch of information, here's a bunch of facts, here's a bunch of figures about how we can better support this population. It wasn't inherent. Like I had to fight for it. And I got it, which I'm really happy about, and we have a great team now. But even then, like if you look at, we have a large print collection, and our large print collection is tiny compared to every other collection in the library. And so on a broader way, I think it's really important. Everyone should always know their biases about all the things. So I just wanted to start with that.
And whenever we serve the community, we want to really try to serve the whole community. And I think Andy did a really great job of steering us towards that and making this happen. And I think it's been a great team effort because we're bringing pop-up libraries to 4 places. We have the Senior Story Hour at 2 places. We're working on some really cool in-house stuff that we can't talk about yet.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of really great ideas, and I think it's important that we keep having these ideas, and including all of the community.
I'll just get off my soapbox now.
All right. Well, thanks, Kitty, and for joining us. And if anyone has questions, you can always reach out to us. And thanks everyone else for tuning in.
Are there any other questions? We have about 4 or 5 minutes.
Oh, Julie.
All right.
Okay, so you're gonna stop.
Okay, we're stopping now. Goodbye.
Really stopping the recording.
Yeah.